Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. The season may be winding down, but we still had a lot of feeder series action to get through and a lot of feeder series related news to cover. But this time we will start with a slightly different segment and talk about the Ginetta Junior Winter Series. Over in the UK at Silverstone, we did have the one-round Ginetta Junior Winter Series Championship, and here it was Isaac Phelps who really was the man of the weekend with 2 controlled wins in the scrappy class, even if he couldn't quite make his way to the podium in the last race. He was also by far the surprise of the regular season to me, so it's really no surprise to see him do well here, and if he returns for a full season assault next season, he does return as a pretty firm favourite, at least given the list of participants we already have. The real story over the course of the weekend was of course the car racing debut of Red Bull Juniors Rocco Coronel and Scott Lindblom. That's the entire reason why we have to bring it up here. Rocco Coronel in particular hit the ground running. Yes, he was a bit scrappy, but he did bring home 2 very solid results and was on for a third until a last lap incident in the third race. So all things considered, a very solid car racing debut, quickly learning the different style of battling required in closed cockpit cars compared to karts. So a success there in my book. On the flip side, Scott Lindblom was struggling a fair bit, I think it is fair to say. He had a crash in the first race, then an issue in the second race, presumably linked to the crash in the first race, at least that's my theory. And then he was more or less just back marking in the third. I was a little curious, maybe still a car issue following the race 1 crash, of course, could be a thing. Either way, it is a one-off debut, so I don't like reading too much into the negative performances, but obviously having a good performance here is only a good sign. It's a very cool collaboration between Red Bull Junior Team and R Racing in my book. I do hope this continues. I do hope they both go for the full season, giving them the opportunity to learn cars while they're still aged 14. Obviously, we've seen in recent years that this tends to work out really well. Famously, Freddie Slater dominated the series last year to an unbelievably ridiculous extent. So that's also his performance in the Italian F4 this year wasn't exactly a surprise. So it is an important series, and if it isn't on your watch list yet, I do suggest adding it just to see those, basically pre-F4 graduates, if that makes sense. And this comes with a question: should we include the Ginetta Junior Series in Race Week Review for the next season? Not every round, of course, but every now and then. Let me know down in the comments. And otherwise, let's talk about Formula Racing. We begin our Formula Racing segment over in the US at COTA with the season finale for the Formula Regional Americas Championship. And here we are at the slightly curious side of Patrick Woodstoff not competing in the final round as he already had the title secured. This left Titus Sherlock, somewhat going up against an open goal to secure P3 in the championship. At least that's what should have happened, and he did dominate the first race in style. It looked all set to be this successful end to the season. Obviously he suffered from injury in the middle of the season, so a very nice comeback there. Unfortunately, I have been reliably informed by the man himself. He suffered heavily in the second race after an initially good getaway with an engine issue and, slowly slipped down through the field. And then to add insult to injury, he got himself a 5-second penalty for not respecting a full course yellow, which dropped him another couple of positions and thus just about cost him P3 in the championship to Jack Bowling, even though the latter crashed in the second race. So that was a very unfortunate turn of events and a little heartbreaking considering everything that has happened, but make no mistake about who was the at least 3rd best driver in the category, or to put it more realistically, it really was Patrick Woodstoff, Ryan Sheehan also still not participating, and Titus Sherlock, who were like a step above the rest of the field consistently throughout the year. Quick shout out to Nicola, the female competitor on the grid, and she was back on the podium after the aforementioned penalty chaos in the second race. Sherlock was not the only one to get a post-race penalty. Sure, it wasn't entirely a podium on merit, and yes, it is a pretty mediocre field, especially in the midfield, but I do think it is still cool to have a woman outside of F4 in a slightly quicker car and still consistently at the sharp end of the midfield. The other big story of the weekend was the late season debuts also happening here, as is tradition in feeder series around the world, with lots and lots of new faces showing up, and one older face in Cole Clack returning after he has only done the first round of the year so far, and he did return in style, finished P3 on the road in both races, even though, as I said, he was part of the penalty chaos in the second race, dropping him back down. But yeah, a quick guy, no issues moving through the pack either, as shown in the second race, so that was a really good point to take away there as well. Then we had Hailie Deegan, who's obviously been announced to do a full season IndyNXT program for next year, and I said I've never seen her race. The expectations were pretty low from everything I've read from NASCAR fans, and yeah, turns out they were pretty much on the money. It was an abysmal single-seater debut. Yes, mid-season debuting, no experience in single-seaters, reasonably quick cars, so obviously lots and lots of caveats, but let's just say so far the negative voices do seem to be correct. And then we had, on a pretty surprising note actually, Bruno Ribeiro with the step up from the USF Juniors and doing very well for himself, front running pace in both of the races, and he actually ended up getting an absolutely dominant win in the second race. Yes, of course, obviously, we've talked about it, heavily aided by the actual favourite suffering from engine issues, but still a very, very strong late season debut, and we had a similar performance from Brady Golan, also sort of taking the sideways step from the USF series over to this and fighting for the podium in both races and even taking home a P2 for himself. This sort of brings up the question, is this an outlook for what we can expect from next year's grid, or was this just people, you know, the USF series have already concluded obviously, so maybe they were just looking for some extra seat time in the off season. But I am cautiously optimistic that maybe this means some people might explore the jump over from the USF, the IndyCar ladder side of things, over to the Formula Regional Americas next year, because this is a championship with potential, just unfortunately suffering often from like a pretty mediocre grid. Then a series suffering from a slightly different issue was the F4 USA Championship. And here obviously the massive issue throughout the year was the split between the USA F4 and the JS F4, the Ligier F4 series, call it whatever you want. Essentially having the old gen and the new gen of cars competing alongside in two separate championships. This time, this particular weekend, actually sharing the track, so more or less doing multi-class style racing, although the multi-class element obviously didn't factor into it, the races were way too short. Either way, an interesting twist, unfortunately one that didn't work out particularly well on the broadcasting side, because the graphics people were not prepared to have two separate classes running on the same time, so that was a little annoying just for the viewers. And just from a competition perspective, this obviously meant throughout the year both series have suffered from tremendously reduced grid sizes, meaning neither of these championship wins is particularly meaningful in my book. In the USA F4 series, Daniel Quimby ended up winning the season after his year-long duel against Nicola Stati with a couple of P2s to secure the title. Considering the small field, as I just said, this unfortunately feels rather meaningless, and I really hope the series get reunited next year so we can actually take something away from these results. The other story in the series was debutant Alex Popov stealing the show big time, winning twice out of the gate. He is a 17-year-old from Venezuela, so that's also very cool. Just once again, a different country, one that you certainly do not associate with motor racing. And as far as I could find out with the limited information available, he has very little experience, in particular in open wheelers, so he definitely has my curiosity going forward, even if he was only going up against like 5 odd people. And then in the JSF4 or the Ligier F4, we had Teddy Musella with a lights out weekend to take the title against his particular title rival Keke Hahania, who had to settle for P2 and getting himself into too many incidents this weekend while he was trying to turn the title fight around. Again, I can't stress this enough. It does feel incredibly meaningless just as a title by itself, although this grid was pretty competitive throughout, so we will see next year maybe there is like 5 or 6 good drivers coming out of this, or 0, it could really be either. Given what we know from last year, I reckon this might just be a small but pretty competitive field all around. In this particular weekend, it actually also wasn't all that small, as you may have noticed if you watched the races, because we had a ton of late season debutants, more or less stealing the headlines, at least in terms of interest for my money. I can't say too much about most of them because I do have a significant lack of US karting knowledge. That's the thing I'll be trying to fix over the winter, but yeah, I can't just do it now, can I? Instead, I do want to highlight the drivers I am familiar with. First of all, USF Juniors midfielder Leonardo Scorpioni had a very strong showing here with a couple of P2s. His USF Juniors season was good, but nothing special or particularly memorable, so that was a pretty nice surprise. And then we had, and I forgot how to pronounce his name once again, Sascha van Tipat Bosch. Yeah, it's very confusing. He's got like 4 names, Dutch people, eh? But I can tell you a little bit about his career because I've been watching him for a bit. He is a European karting star, mostly making his name in the single make series. And this time around, he actually took the year off to mostly focus on F4 testing, as far as I could gather from his social media. And obviously now has decided to do a late season debut over in the US. I was a little surprised initially to see him going down the US route, but obviously there is a reason for this, and that's that he is only 14 years old, which makes perfect sense. Of course, he just wants to get some track time before he turns 15 in February, where he will presumably then go on to a full European campaign. I do expect him to rock up in the Spanish F4. Let's see if I am correct there. But either way, this is a man to watch. He got a win here on debut, so a decent, well, a strong result, but again, not super meaningful in brackets. Either way, keep an eye out for this guy. Then a quick switch of continents where we had the Japanese F4, I believe the penultimate round, this time with 3 instead of 2 races, as we had the replacement race for the cancelled one last round. It was still a very wet affair throughout the weekend, as you kind of expect from Japan at this point. And due to this and the nature of the grid with the Masters participants running as well, we didn't have a whole lot of green running across the 3 races. The most spectacular crash was one from Arabi in the 3rd race, I can show to you here. So definitely lots and lots of chaos and entertainment in that sense, but not much green racing to watch. It was a weekend really dominated by the Honda Juniors, and in particular Yuto Nomura setting the pace throughout the weekend in both the wet and the dry 3rd race to get a clean hat-trick, locking in the title with 1 round to go. A very convincing title at the end of the day, considering like throughout the slow build-up of the season, admittedly, it never really felt like we had one concise favourite. It seemed to change round after round, and now he has ended up winning it in pretty dominant fashion after all. His teammate and fellow Honda junior Ryota Harashi got knocked off the podium in the last race, but was still very much a front runner throughout the weekend, and thus is still sitting in P2 in the standings. So the Honda program, despite only having 2 drivers compared to the 4 Toyota juniors competing in the series, are definitely dominating the headlines. Talking about the Toyota program, where the Toyota front-running junior Yuki Sano still with 2 solid podium runs throughout the weekend to keep himself in P4 overall. And as I said, he is comfortably the best Toyota driver at the moment. Umegaki and Arabi are both more midfielders than like actual podium threats. And Tokiya Suzuki is sometimes just struggling to get into the points, and truth be told, just hasn't really impressed all that much throughout the year. A quick shout out to Ryo Shimono, the only female participant in the series, as she has finally scored her first points of the year. Now, don't get your hopes up. She is 24 years old and she has done this for 3 years now, and this is, I believe, like her 2nd or 3rd time scoring points at all. So not really a driver you have to get excited about for the future, but hey, it's a girl scoring points in F4. I guess we can highlight it, can't we? And then, last but not least for our racing action, of course we have to mention it, Formula 1 in Brazil, with the best drive of Max Verstappen's career, at least potentially, to win in horrendous wet conditions from P17 after Norris sort of fumbled it from pole position. I do just want to pick up on some of the popular talking points at the moment. The most important one being the how much was it luck and how much was just an epic drive from Verstappen. And yes, I am very much aware that the fans seem to agree anyway, the luck was required, but obviously it was still, you know, the best drive of his career. That is sort of the sentiment. I just want to actually say, I don't even think the luck did play that big of a role. I think he at the very least had very solid chances of making it onto the podium even without any luck. And then depending on who's still in front of him, I could have seen him win this anyway. Yes, of course, it made it a lot easier and just meant that he didn't really have to get any overtaking done in the super tricky conditions to do any overtaking. So I understand how he has been massively helped by the fortunate safety car / red flag timing. But either way, just the mad pace difference he had to the rest of the field and the fact that he is Max Verstappen and he isn't exactly shy to get an overtake done, I feel like he could have maybe even had a very similar result, albeit obviously without the 20-second gap at the end, even without the lucky interference. A very different storyline playing out on the other steps of the podium was the absolutely feel-good story for Alpine with a P2 and P3 for Ocon and Gasly, and I just wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about Alpine because I haven't really mentioned them all year. They've just been so forgettable and depressing to watch, really just a terrible year all around. And this was, I guess we can't really call it like a turning point because I don't see them replicating, obviously not a double podium, but I don't even see them replicating like a double points run next time out. I hope they prove me wrong. I wanted to pick up on this thing that Ocon said after the race, where he essentially talked up his own driving performance, as you do as both Esteban Ocon and as racing drivers in general, so I get it. And essentially said, yeah, in the rain, the drivers can make the difference, the cars are all more equal and everything, the old classic sentiment. And I just want to say, given how the Alpines have looked throughout quali and the race, I think they have gambled a lot on just setting up the car really well for wet conditions. I don't know if I'm completely off base here, but at least that's what it looked like to me. The team has certainly found something here. It is no coincidence that it was both Ocon and Gasly running well. Ocon can, you know, hype himself up all he wants there, but I just do not believe it. Obviously, not taking anything away from the drive they've had, especially given the fact that like half of these very, very good drivers have managed to put it into a wall and the Alpine boys haven't, so it's already deserved from that point alone. Last but not least for our F1 segment, we had the rookies struggling, all except Liam Lawson. The latter keeps his elbows wide open against Perez and I absolutely love it. It is a joy to watch, and like, he certainly knows, even in the races, what seat he is racing for, and he is, I think it looks like he is trying to make that point at every opportunity. Look at me, I'm quicker than Perez, so I can even beat him in the slower car. So that's very cool to see, and I love that he is getting super racy and in his face. Behrman struggling is not really surprising given the fact he was a last-minute replacement for K-Mag, and no shame there. It was really only Colapinto where I had slightly higher hopes for his performance, but then again I suppose he was still matching Albon in that sense because Albon obviously found the wall quicker and more often. Anyway, let me know all of your thoughts about the F1 weekend and all junior series things down in the comments. We'll do a quick kart report for now. For our weekly karting report, I have decided to only do a very, very quick overview on one single topic of the recent Dutch Championship weekend. It was the conclusion of the Dutch National Karting Championship, but truth be told, it was one of those series that I very loosely follow, but I certainly haven't watched anywhere near every round of the season, so it would have felt a bit weird to go over every single champion, and some of them aren't particularly meaningful. So instead, I just want to highlight a single person from this entire grid. And here our focus is on Jaden Teen, continuing a great run after his podium at the World Final last year with a controlled win in the Rotax senior category to take the title. And at the same time, he was giving his KZ2 debut this weekend. Unfortunately, an incident in the pre-final meant he had to come from the very back in the final, so he couldn't really show much in terms of fighting for the win, but he did work his way to a pretty solid P13, so I do think even his shifter debut can be classified as a success, and then of course winning the seniors title is about the biggest success you can possibly achieve in this championship. Quick shout out only to young Enzo Ball for making it to the podium in the KZ2 category, also continuing his great run in the class. Anyway, time for the news. Everyone's favorite segment, time to talk about all roster moves for next year, and we begin in F3 with Nicola Lacorte moving to Dams and Roman Bilinski moving to Roden in F3. In Nicola Lacorte's case, well, it's no surprise, he obviously has the budget, he has the Alpine affiliation, so yeah, I did sort of see this coming, at least seeing him step up was very much expected, but I personally don't really like it. I don't really think he has shown enough to belong there on merit, if you want to use that term. So I'm not a huge fan of this move, but if he has to move up to F3, at least I suppose Dams, the formerly Genser, I am going to judge them based on the Genser performance, seems like an appropriate destination in that sense. For Roman Bilinski, I am super happy he is getting the call up to F3. Roden very much also seems like an appropriate team, at least if it ends up being the Roden we've seen with Callum Boysen at the end of last year, not the one from the previous couple of years. But if he ends up getting the sort of good midfield car that Roden was at the end of the year, then this is very much deserved. Obviously, Bilinski has had a rough year, suffering from injury after a non-racing related car accident, if I remember correctly. But every single time he has been on track, he's done a phenomenal job. Obviously won the Formula Regional Oceania over the winter, so definitely a guy on the upwards trajectory. Then we have another announcement for F1 Academy, slowly the news trickling in, and here it is one I'm super happy about. Raffaele Ferreira announced to go to, I believe, to MP, either way being the V-Carb associated driver. I don't think there's been an official statement about which team she'll be paired with, but either way, let's assume it's MP. Obviously the team's been terrible throughout the season, so that's nothing to get excited about, but certainly she is one of the exciting young female drivers that should be like the prime targets for F1 Academy to make this grid more competitive going forward. Currently competing in Brazilian F4. I've talked about her loads all year long, so let's not waste any more time there. And then the last of our European news is Jack Taylor staying in GB4 with Fortec. Now you might ask yourself, why even include this? I've never cared about Jack Taylor in my life, and truth be told, you're not alone, neither have I really. But I want to highlight this just to make the point that maybe we can see more returning drivers next year in GB4. This is really the one thing that the series lacked this season for me personally, having only Harry Burgoyne Jr. as sort of a non-rookie to measure the rookies against. So I hope Jack Taylor won't be the only returning driver, and that's the reason I included this piece of news. And then quickly over to the US side of things again, we have a couple more IndyNXT announcements. First of all, Chip Ganassi Racing obviously now fielding 2 cars in IndyNXT because they had to drop 2 of their IndyCar cars for next season with the new charter system. And they have announced Jonathan Brown and Niels Koolen, the dreadful Niels Koolen, as their drivers for next season. Now, Niels Koolen being in IndyNXT is obviously a huge disappointment for anyone actually watching the series, because he'll just occupy a seat that now nobody else can have. That's a bit of a shame. In Jonathan Brown's case, that's a reasonable signing. Bit of a midfielder, bit anonymous, but nothing bad by any stretch of the imagination. A somewhat more interesting announcement was the Jankos Hollinger driver Miguel Mar Garcia announced for an IndyNXT campaign for next year. And here's again where I ask you guys, maybe someone is Mexican or a rally fan or something and does have a little more information on this guy, because the only thing I could find out is he does appear to be a Mexican rally driver with zero connection to Formula cars. So I am curious to see how he does. Obviously, I'm not really expecting anything, but yeah, who knows? Maybe he's like a secret Mexican rally star. I don't know. You gotta tell me that. Last but not least, Max Taylor has been confirmed to step up to the USF Pro 2000s with VRD, to more or less nobody's surprise. I guess the only interesting question would have been, is he also considering a European program with his one-off appearance in GB3? It appears he does not, or at least he's going to be doing it like Nikita Johnson, I suppose. That could be an option. either way, looking forward to see one of our first championship favorites for next year's USF Pro 2000 confirmed already. Now then, as always, it's been a lot. It's your time to drop all of your opinions and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And otherwise, I thank you all for watching and I hope to catch you in the next one.